This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air. And I want to thank you for being on the show. This is Kimberly Van Sickle is here, and I want to welcome you to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. And how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is really quite exciting for me.
Well, we'd like to have people on the show. We've been on the air since 2016, and this is actually episode we're at about 1022. It's tracking
Congratulations.
that since 2016 on up. Oh, thank you. And we're also a featured podcast. If you check it up there on the top, it says listen on Newsly. We will be on Newsly later tonight as a featured podcast on that platform. And that's an audio only platform. And people can use that coupon code of GHOST to check it out for free for 30 days. Other than that, we're going to
Fabulous.
talk to you as you're an author and you've been doing a lot of different work, in terms of being a evolving writer, and that's like the term you brought up. Maybe I'll try to
Yeah,
pin that down what that means for you. But one of the things we're going to talk about today is actually the concept of evolution of book publishing. So you might want to just start with like an introduction of your background to the audience and kind of give your story.
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Kimberly Van Sickle. I'm actually a retired educator. I was a library director for over 20 years in a middle school just outside of Chicago, suburb of Chicago. Now I am a librarian in a middle school in a different capacity, in a non-education capacity. So when I go home at night, I get to read or write or walk my dogs or just kind of chill. It's really a dream job. Um, and I started writing creatively for myself personally when I was in seventh grade. I remember distinctly in seventh grade, I wrote a poem and I thought it was like phenomenal. I'm like, everything rhymed. It was the best thing ever. My mom put it up on the refrigerator. I guess it was my first published piece of work. Um, but I always kind of dabbled. I mean, even in high school and in college, um, it was therapeutic for me to write. So about 10 years ago, I really became more earnest in like fleshing out of a story in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the first two acts of it. The first two acts of Assassins Are Us, which is a young adult satirical mystery, but a family of assassins next door that would just be your regular old nuclear family. And I guess it was more like 8 years ago. And it sat on a shelf because for like the next 8 years because life, kids, um, teaching, it was just all too much. But when I retired and I had this lovely kind of retirement gig, I was able to work with content editor Bryce Wilson through Atmosphere Press, who helped me flesh out that third act. And then Assassins Are Us grew wings. And I'm already working on the sequel because it's gotten some really good
Yes.
reviews. It's up for some awards,
Mm-hmm.
and I really want to see the continuation of Hetty Hendershot's story continue on. Who is the main character, main protagonist in the story? Um, so that's me in a nutshell. But I have been, like my bio says, I've been a plot junkie my entire life. Whether it's reading, whether it's a movie, something that's streaming, I just love to be sucked in by a solid storyline. Um, and there are so many great stories out there that just don't get to be published. And this is what kind of what I wanted to have a
Yeah.
discussion with you
That.
today. It's um, the evolution of publishing. I'll throw the ball back into your court if you want to start a discussion on it. I mean, I have some thoughts, but you're the
Yeah.
host.
I mean, it's like, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm a songwriter, so it's a different type of writing, but it's the same kind of issue where sometimes I run into people and they have work like painters, you go to their room and they've got all these paintings, but they never brought it to a gallery. And I running into songwriters as I'm a producer, and they've got hundreds of demos, but they're never ready. So they're like, oh, well, I can't put that out. In the way the world is today, at least as a songwriter and a producer, we have a lot of places that we can just throw it on a wall, and get it out, and we can kind of like beta readers, like a SoundCloud is a platform for us where we can put demos out, and we can see what people how they react to it. And if they react well, then you can actually go and then push it to Spotify or push it to Apple or stuff. So we've got different levels that we can kind of throw stuff into a mixtape or throw it into like an underground world. And like the beta reader for authors, like we can get feedback. And so I think a lot of times it's like that first step. Like, how do you start to feel that you're worthy? You know, like some people are kind of like they have imposter syndrome and they don't feel that they can put it out there. And then there's a lot of artists that are out there to tell you, like, I might not be the best artist in the world, but I was like, I was willing to put it out there. And now you see it. And so it's like sometimes people like stop themselves on what maybe your feelings on that.
So I got to tell you that vulnerability piece, I completely, I understand that. Like, you want to put it out there, but you don't want to be criticized. What if I put it out there and nobody likes it, nobody listens to it? What if I put it out there and it's all crickets? I mean, that first leap of faith in yourself, and you just commit yourself to being vulnerable, which is, I'm going to say, for me, terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. Um, but I'm glad I did. And I've received some good book reviews, and I've received some book reviews that were like, it's just not for me. That's all right. That's okay. Um, you
Yeah.
know, there's a statistic out there where J.K. Rowling, I think she had like 250,000
Tons of
one-star
rejections.
reviews, or rejections and one-star reviews. It's like, okay, so it's not everybody's cup of tea. So you're going to find your audience at somewhere, somehow,
Yeah.
some way. Um, Again, it's just having faith in yourself. And I got to say,
Yeah,
my
exactly.
husband, my husband was my biggest
Your
cheerleader,
husband.
so he just kept pushing me and pushing me. Um, and it always helps
That's
to have
good.
somebody
It's
in
good
your
to have
corner.
somebody in your corner.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Be- Being an artist is like the hard thing is that like to so many people want to clone things because like you get social media today, you get these algorithms and everybody's watching a million people watching a cat video with the same music behind it. Right. And so, yeah, it gets a million views because everybody's using that same 30 seconds of the same song with the same cat, and so it's like, of course you'll hit the algorithm, but does that mean it's good? I kind of grew up being a guy that likes underground music. Like I was into Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. I was into, Big Star and Alex Jones. I was into stuff that was like not well known. But you come to find out that Lou Reed influenced David Bowie. Lou Reed influenced almost all the alternative bands in the early 80s and 90s, like REM and Counting Crows. It's like all these bands were influenced by a guy that did not commercially make it. Lou Reed and the Velvets were not commercial. They didn't make any money at all. Right?
No,
It was like later when Lou Reed actually had an album produced by David Bowie, where Walk on the Wild Side was produced by Bowie. He helped him, and Bowie actually was a fan of Lou Reed. He was in awe of Lou Reed during the session. There's a whole story where like Bowie was totally falling over himself to be working with Lou, and Lou was like, well, like I'm not that big. It's like cause he wasn't at that time. So it's like so sometimes like just the chance of putting something out into the world. And I always talk about William Blake, my favorite Victorian poet, was not
my
known in
gosh.
his time. Right? William
Oh,
Blake was not known in his time. But the interesting thing that people don't know is all the songs of innocence and experience. He did them on metal plates. He etched pitch drawings that go with the songs of innocence and experience, and they were found in a barn. And after the Victorian age ended,
wow.
people found this all this work they did, and he's famous as being as Tennyson, Wordsworth, and Lord Byron, but he wasn't known in his time. But he felt the need to put that work into metal etchings So it became almost like eternal. So that kind of like this idea, like if you should believe in yourself, like William Blake at least believed to put it into that form, so it would be found after he was gone.
Well, as an English major from the University of Iowa, I had to take all that English traditional literature stuff. That's a fascinating fact that I did not know. That's about William Blake. That's fascinating. Um, so that I just, if you don't mind, an aside on this, he had the presence of mind to self-publish to a degree,
Yeah,
right? To a degree.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I mean, 200 years before, that's pretty amazing. Um,
Before,
I
yeah,
would love to.
it's a great story. I like to tell people. I like to tell a lot of young people because they assume that he was big. It's like no, nobody knew who he was. Right? It's like sometimes you just got to have that confidence. He felt like that work should be out there, and he did it. And that's to a certain degree. He wasn't good at marketing, but
Well,
he put it
it was
out
a
there.
different millennium. Forget
Yeah,
about a different century. It was a different millennium entirely. So yeah, it would have been. I don't know if it would have been easier or harder. It seems like it's harder. It seems like it's difficult. I have found over the past 8 to 10 years, as much as I've shopped my book out there, as much as I have pleaded to literary agents and to the big five publishers, um, it, it just seems that there's this cycle of you can't get published unless you're represented, and you can't get represented unless you're published. So it was like
that's
this
Polish
ongoing
right out to the
cycle of
house.
insanity that I just could not. I mean, so as much as I tried and I tried, and then I was like, I can't do this. I got kids. They're off to college now. They're out of the house. They're gone. I'm retired. Okay, I'm going to really shop it out. But it hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed. So the I feel those smaller independent publishers
Mhm.
really need to be more globally recognized, because they're gonna find, I mean, people like me, they're gonna help people like me find the audience. And
Yeah,
who knows, maybe Assassins Are Us isn't maybe it's not a mass market book, but I would hate to see these independent publishers be swept under the rug or dismissed, because they're doing some valid work. They really are.
yeah. It's like the indie publishers in the record industry. In the music industry, you have the big guys, right? But a lot of us musicians, we're all independent now, and we look for distribution networks. But a lot of a lot of the smaller labels, like the big small label I'll point out was like Sub Pop. Sub Pop is where Nirvana came from, where Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. They
Hmm.
were a label that was out in Seattle, and they had all these underground bands, and Nirvana was one of them. And they had a bunch of other ones. And as soon as Nirvana broke through, like it's like I know 30, 40 other bands that they had around them suddenly went boom, and then you had the whole grunge era with the Soundgarden and the Stone Temple Pilots and all those bands. They seemed like they came out of nowhere, but it wasn't nowhere. These guys had been working. So there's no like overnight success story. A lot of these people had been working for like 5 years before they even broke that Nirvana thing. And so a lot of times, it's like if you can find like a collective. What I find with artists is like if you get into a collective where you can get, if you're a painter, you get into a gallery with a bunch of other painters, you have a better shot at getting in the gallery. If you're a musician and you try to book one show as a one act, well, you have a better shot if you book a whole night with like 10 other acts, like a 10 other acts that kind of do what you do. And then you can get into the club, you get in the club, you build a following. So I don't know if that's like that with art, with writing, but have you found that there's any kind of collective other than your indie label
Oh,
or
well,
indie publisher?
yeah, there are apps. They're like, I wouldn't call them collectives. I would call them more like support groups for for writers who want to be authors, and to to be published widely out there. Um, but oh yeah, like so I belong to various groups on Twitter, and um, I follow some really funny authors, independent authors who just want their bit. They just want their bit, and on TikTok, so many social platforms have created these venues. And you mentioned something earlier about the streaming services for music. I got to think, you probably do that with lower overhead, right? Like you don't have a physical, like
Yeah, yeah,
vinyl. I mean,
physical copy.
it would be
Yeah,
so cool to have, because vinyl has come back, right? It would be
yeah.
so.
We do small batches. Like a lot of
Mm.
us indie people, I've done small batches of CDs in small batches, like 1,000 or something. Like that's how independent artists you can get a small batch of vinyl. You could do like 1,000. You could do like 5,000. The big record companies, they run to like 100,000 and
Yeah,
500,000, a million
yeah.
copies. But if you're an indie artist, you can go and run like a batch of like 100 vinyl or 500 vinyl. You can run a small batch, and then when you tour, you have like a merch desk, and you sell your t-shirt and you sell your poster, and you sell that and the added value is you sign it, and then somebody's willing to buy that for 25-30 dollars
Hmm.
versus your streaming song gets 0.004 of a penny. Like I can
Oh,
get onto Spotify, I can get onto Apple, but they give me 0.004 of a penny for every play, right? And now they make it so you have 1,000 plays before they even pay you. So it gets more likely that if I do a show and I show up with my merch table and they only do like run 100 or 200 copies of a T-shirt and a CD and some vinyl, I'll make more money selling that than I will on Spotify. Spotify is like the radio. It's like gets you known around the world, but you don't really make a lot of money unless you do millions of streams.
so can
You
I
have to do
ask you, is
billions of streams to make any money.
so can I ask you, is that price point, that 0.004, what is it, like, so 400ths of a penny, is
Of a
that
penny.
price point
Yes.
common? Is that common for smaller
That's for
independent?
the average indie artist. The Taylor Swift gets a higher rate. Like if you're a Taylor Swift and you're a Beyonce, you're in a totally different tier, and so your money from the monthly subscriber is higher. So her
Mm,
cut is higher because she's a big artist. So the A level artists, they get a bigger cut. We don't even know what their cuts are because they don't like to advertise it, but you can kind of guess. It's a lot higher.
sure.
It's a lot. The average like independent musician, their ratings on a different platform is 0.004 to 0.006. And different platforms pay you, like I think Apple pays a little more, and Tidal pays more than Spotify. They have different tiers. So depending on which streaming platform you're on, you get a little bit more of a penny, but you really start making the money from subscriptions. Like if I do Instagram subscriptions, I'll make more money doing that. I'll make more money uh, with reels off of Facebook. Facebook pays me a higher reel rate. I make more money on my podcast. My podcast advertising rate and is maybe was like it's called CPM per million. It's really per like 1,000, but you get like $30 per 1,000 plays, which is way higher than the music rate. It's very high, significantly higher than the music rate. So it's like music has been devalued ever since Napster. It's like the days of the $16 CD, artists started losing as soon as Napster and iTunes showed up. Then the percentage of money that you get off a song is like not anywhere near what it was 20 years ago.
So you do have to juggle that, don't you? You do have to juggle the value of, I want my work out there. It's like indirectly proportionate, if you will, to to
Yes.
making money. So it is a struggle, and my goal for my book was, I I wanted to get it published, and I
Hmm.
wanted just one good professional review. I mean, that really was like, and my husband's like, no, we want to make money. I'm like, I think that's
That's a
not
good
all
goal.
that realistic. I said, I said, my goal is here, and his is like way up here. Um, and my low
Yeah,
expectations, I've exceeded
achievable,
my low expectations.
achievable goal.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe for my next book,
But
I'll
if you
raise that
create
bar.
achievable, yeah, well, if you create achievable goals, to say a lot of people will get out of an industry. Like you get a musician, if you get somebody says, "Well, I got to make a million bestseller," well, if you, the chances of that are kind of low. Not that it couldn't happen, but if you don't hit it, then you're probably going to stop. I've been playing music since I was 17. If I thought that, like when I was 18, if I didn't get into the top 20, then I'm done. Well, a lot of my friends that don't play anymore were like that. Like if they don't get into the top 50, by the time they're 22, they're done. And now they don't, they're the guitars like sitting in the closet. So, but the reason you do it is because you love it. And what I
Yeah.
found
Yeah.
is I kind of stumbled on this podcast, back in 2016, and I get my name out there, my brand out there, in ways that are different than just my music. Like, so just showing up and getting your message out on different mediums. Like you could go out and read at a gallery or read at a coffee shop or
Yeah.
go on like these platforms. They have these online platforms. I talked to this lady that actually has an online comic platform that does an online comic show live. And
Oh,
now
wow.
she's branching out and having like authors do readings and musicians show up. So there's lots of cool things that are coming up because of the COVID. Like people are creating virtual platforms. My daughter created a virtual gallery for disabled artists to
Oh,
be able
how
to put
wonderful.
music, to put artwork into a virtual gallery like a museum and put their pieces into it and then have people visit and donate. And so there's a lot of new ideas out there where it's not just your neighborhood, it's not just where you are. You can affect a whole other world wide web. So there's a lot of opportunity if you're more expansive in your reach.
And not too many great things came out of COVID, but your daughter embraced it. Well done. That's great.
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas, because like what we found, we did a online veteran producer festival, and that gave bands 30 minutes to play from their room, from wherever they are. And we did it for like 2 years in a row. We're gonna try to do it again, but it's like there's a lot of different things you can come up with. When you have adversity, you can come up with new ideas.
Yep. So necessity is the motherhood of invention, and there was a lot of necessity a lot of needs that came out of COVID. So, can I just circle back to your comment about Lou Reed earlier?
Yeah, yeah,
Can I? So,
yeah, yeah.
so Lou Reed, when you were talking about Lou Reed, I was like, wow, because I mean, I I had very young parents in the 70s, and Lou Reed and Captain Beefheart and Frank I mean, that that's what was in our house. Um, and looking back on it now, I'm thinking Lou Reed wasn't a megastar. So then I got to thinking, no, Frank Zappa probably did
Not the
not have
beginning.
a mainstream I mean, thinking back on it now, there's no way he had a mainstream big time producer, right? So that
Yeah,
I'm gonna and my parents, God bless them, they still have every single one of their vinyls. I'm gonna go through. I'm gonna have to flip through their albums to see what those record labels were. Because it's really got me thinking. Because I know they
yeah.
have more than
They're
one.
small.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they've got. I know they
yeah. I
have more
mean,
than one Lou Reed too. So
yeah.
I gotta see what else they have.
Well, Lou broke like with Transformer. That made money because Walk on the
Yeah.
Wild Side, Bowie produced it. But when he showed up on the scene with the Velvets in '66, that stuff didn't sell, and there were like 3 to 4 Velvet albums. It would put out. I think Atlantic put them out, but they back then they would let a band be on a label, and you could be on a label and get into the store, and they maybe give you 3 albums, then they drop you. Now today is like you barely get one record, you might get a single, and if you don't kick, then you're done. But on the labels, like in the underground, you can survive longer. And that's why a lot of people are independent because I know there's a lot of artists say they could have under 50,000 fans, like under 100,000, and go like 5, 6, 7, 10 years because you tour and you put out your own merch. And so in that model, you don't have to sell millions of records. You can sell a smaller amount and actually survive. And so it's a matter of like how big do you want to be, or do you want to be an artist? Do you want to be able to actually go out and show up, and maybe you're not showing up in front of 100,000 people, you're showing up in small clubs around the world, but you're actually going around the world, and it's possible. And people, it's just you have to kind of change your expectations of what you want.
So I've got another comment to make. You said that after they have like maybe 2, 3 records with a big record company, they might cut you loose.
Yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with young adult literature or dystopian literature, but The Maze Runner by James Dashner, it's a fabulous dystopian
Mhm.
trilogy, and it was made into blockbuster movies, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, I heard about that.
he came out with a prequel just within the past year or so, The Maze Cutter. But this prequel, it's interesting that you brought this up about the record companies, because this prequel was not produced, I'm sorry, I'm talking record lingo now. I got to get back. I got to change to book lingo. His fourth book, which is the prequel to the Maze Runner series, was actually published by not the major publisher, whoever it was, but by a small independent
Mhm.
press. So that just struck me as odd. Like, why wouldn't this big publisher want to continue with his success? Now, granted, it's been probably 10, 15 years since that series was finalized. So I wonder if maybe that didn't
Mhm.
happen as well, But this is a phenomenal success story, the Maze Runner series,
Yeah, yeah, you're
and
surprised.
very surprised that his prequel, which is, I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's just as fascinating. The origin story to the whole
Yeah,
community
yeah.
in Maze Runner, was not published by his big book publisher. So I guess it's not just specific to the music industry. It's all artists in all forms, all mediums.
Yeah, yeah, it's strange what they try to do. A lot of times you notice in Hollywood that they just keep on remaking existing, you know, movies. They keep on going back and redoing the same thing instead of coming up with something new. I mean, once in a while you get the film directors and producers, they come up with new ideas. But a lot of times there's a lot of stuff this keeps on getting remade. You keep on, and the same thing happens in music. Like we take sampling and covers, and people just want to clone what is already being successful. It's harder to push something that has not been heard. It's harder to today, get the Jimi Hendrix, right? Like now that you've heard Hendrix, it's like, oh, well, that's obvious. It wasn't obvious at the time. Like he was doing something very different than anybody else. It's like the Doors. He's like that was very different than anything else. There was more back in the day. It seemed like people were willing to have art be for art's sake, and you would allow bands like Yes and Zappa and the Mothers and Revenge and Lou Reed and the Velvets. They would allow those bands to be on bigger labels than what you do today. Today you have to have kind of proof that you're going to be big before you can be big.
Yeah, it's hard to come up with that proof before the fact. I have to interject here.
Yeah.
You mentioned Jimi Hendrix. We have 2 dogs, a male dog who's a rescue dog. His name is Hendrix, and a female dog, a rescue dog, whose name is Janice, as in Joplin.
Janice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're into it. Yeah. Well,
Oh,
I
yeah.
was just always amazed with creativity is my main thing. Like I'm into kind of the flow state, happy accidents, not trying to be perfect. But the
Yeah.
idea, kind of like there's a story, and I'll get back into writing in a second, but there's a story where Herbie Hancock, he plays piano. He was originally playing with Miles Davis, like a lot of guys, and when he was younger, and he was playing with Miles, and he was kind of like new to the set, and he made a mistake, and then he thought he was going to be done because he thought Miles was going to kill him. He made a wrong chord progression, but Miles actually took that moment and changed the song to match his chord, which is, and then he said what he took from that was like, wow, well, I can live in the present. I don't have to be obsessed about the next note. There are no real bad notes. You can actually kind of take that as an opportunity, and you can kind of let not be so pressured by trying to keep the song the same, but actually evolve the song or evolve that moment or live in the moment. And I've always kind of been the type of artist that likes that type of work, that's kind of in that moment, more free flow, more authentic, more vulnerable, less willing, more willing to take the early take than to try to edit it out or edit it into something different.
And and isn't that kind of the nature of jazz in general? Free flowing?
Yeah,
Yeah, right?
it's supposed to be.
I mean, those mistakes can be strokes of genius. So, yeah, flow with it for sure. Your earlier comment about,
So I'm
oh,
wondering, like in terms of your writing process, your process, but your process, are you into more like flow state, or do you have like set worlds and ideas that you set up, and then maybe kind of around the edges you let flow happen, or it's kind of case by case?
so I will tell you, this is actually the second book that I've written and published. The first book I wrote was a historical fiction and I self published. And I learned a great deal about that whole self publishing process. And I will say to you that given with the two books that I have written from beginning to end, I have 20 other possible titles in the slush right now, where it's just an idea that comes to me and I will free flow. I'll write and I'll capture it, and then I'll get stuck. And I'll be like, okay, I'll circle back to that. But then something else comes to my mind and I capture another idea. So I I can't say that I truly do have a process. I will say that with both of these books, Placement, the historical fiction, and Assassins Are Us, the satirical mystery, I deliver a solid first and second act. I, I just don't know how it's going to finish. So it's more of what you're talking about, that whole creativity piece. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know how it's going to end. I just started like creating, kind of like jazz, I guess. I just started creating and writing, and it's like I hadn't even like thought how to develop my characters, really. It was just a voice in my head told in that first person
The
narrative
muse.
that drove the storyline, that created the plot. Um, so I can't say that I have a tried and true process. No, I can't. But artists, like,
Kind of like the muse. Yeah, it's that muse thing. Yeah, I've always
yeah,
been like really enamored with the Victorians. They always talked about the muse. And when I talk to a lot of artists, whether they're painters or musicians or actors, they kind of talk about the muse. Where yeah, I think if everybody who's creative, you can channel it. Like the difference between somebody who's a creative and somebody who says they can't be a creative is the fact that we're kind of open enough to take what's in and what's out, right? So there's stuff in the world and there's stuff inside, and we learn how to synthesize it. And sometimes it just happens in a flow state, and the whole thing just comes out. You could be sitting there and just boom, it just comes out. And it's because there's like a subconscious, and then you have a creative capability. So there's stuff that's in your head, there's stuff in your dreams, stuff in waking dreams, the stuff that you might outline. It's all there. And if you start to trust yourself, it starts to come together, whatever form it is, whatever type of artist you are. And that's what I feel that a lot of artists have this natural capability of doing it. And then some artists will structure things more and outline more and create worlds that, tighten things a little bit, and then just know how much to give or get, or it kind of serves whatever that project is. How much organization does it need? How much detail does it need? How much extra does it need? Or sometimes it can just be what it is. You don't know until you get into it.
So 30 years of being a public educator, a language arts teacher, and a library director, man, we choked outlines down kids' throats. I mean, that's just what we did. We needed to see an outline of your thoughts, an outline of your ideas. And granted, it was more for uh, nonfiction writing, so like reports and
Yeah,
essays and that
resume,
kind of thing. There's so little
paper.
time. There's so little time um, in our curriculum, at least, for a creative outlet. But if there were time, it would have been fascinating to have seen how kids might approach to writing a short story. Like they wrote small poems, like examples of this type of meter
Yeah,
or this type of rhyme scheme, just like little snippets, but couldn't really delve into like a a short story, like to create a short story, or even like your own little character development exercise. Um, there,
yeah,
there just wasn't wiggle room for that. So the thought of me using an outline for something creative scares the hell out of me. Like I don't think I could do it for a creative sense. You know, I
yeah,
might have some broad strokes like,
yeah,
oh, I think this is the main conflict, or oh, this is going to be the absolute climax where this character feels something that's going to turn this book all the way around. But my whole process, I just don't think I could follow an outline. It would
yeah.
be
What I
stifling.
find is, yeah. Well, over time, like as an artist, like I started, and I would like actually map out what I was going to do. I would kind of write down, I can write the notes. I could put it on the grid and have a structure. But what I found is I could go and do that, and then what I ended up doing is like when I sat at the piano and actually just started doing it, I would end up throwing it what I wrote down out. I would throw it out because what I found on the piano, if I just put my recorder on and just played, that in that act of just doing it in real time, what I played actually always came out better than what I was trying to design in my head. That
There you
actually
have it.
going and doing it just and it just some people it's different. Like if you're a classical musician, you have to read the Chopin, you have to read the Beethoven, you have to read the Bach, and you interpret it, but you stay within it. And the thing I found with classical musicians that was really interesting compared to the jazz fusion guys, I bring a classical guy in, he's got the skill set. He should be able to play that fusion because he's got the same kind of skill set. But if you put him in there, he doesn't know where to go. Like if you don't tell him the note, he doesn't know what to do. And I was so shocked that the classical guys couldn't actually play it. They
Wow.
couldn't free themselves from the structure. They were so into the structure that they couldn't give themselves the liberty to be out of the structure. A lot of times. There were some guys that could, but most of the time they couldn't. And I was like, wow, I just couldn't. But that shows you what when you teach somebody a certain thing, sometimes they get stuck in it if they're not able to get out of it.
Yeah. So that whole stifling piece. Yeah. So I'd like to think that public educators don't. I hope we haven't beaten the creativity out of kids because we need a lot more artists out there. I mean, we just do. We need a lot more. I think expression out there. Um, and I have found when I was trying to find a literary agent or a publisher, there are scads of resources for authors who are young adults, not young adult authors, but there are golden opportunities out there for kids to get their short stories, their poems, their novels, novellas published. Um, and I would just hate to see a generation of like stifled voices and no creativity juices flowing out there, when it's probably a whole lot easier for young adults to get published than for an adult writing young adult
Of course,
literature.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
market is
yeah.
like a youth market. Yeah, but it tends our society tends to give youth the advantage, and so there's a lot of opportunities if you can get past imposter syndrome. If you can get past, not the whole idea of thinking that you have to be like Stephen King.
Oh
You've
yeah.
got to be a known at that level because there's so many people that won't even try art because they say, well, I can't do that because they're not Picasso, they're not Mozart, they're not William Blake. But the whole idea, my opinion, when I tell people as a producer, is like I want to hear the song that you are scared to show anybody
Oh
instead of the
yeah.
song that's copying or cloning something in the top 50. A lot of people will come to you and they say, well, I can clone this Taylor Swift sound or I can clone Drake sound. And they think that's what people want to show that you can copy or what's out there. But I rather know that vulnerable person that is scared to show that demo. That's probably it interests me a lot more because to me that doesn't sound like anything else that's out there, and I'd rather
Yeah.
work on that because that's what's interesting to me. And when you can encourage people to not want to do the formula and not hit the algorithm so they can get so many views, we have a society that's so into trying to clone the algorithm and get the perfect this, the perfect that. It's like to me, the happy accident is what it's all about. That to me is the creative spark. And so many people kind of get, like you said, they get told not to do that.
Yeah. And again, to your point, kind of blend in your point here about, originality, original works, original something that's not been produced again. Um, in the 1980s, Steven Spielberg directed a remarkable movie adaptation from The Color Purple. The movie,
Mhm.
it had Steven Spielberg behind it. That name in and of itself is a phenomenal feat, to have your name attached to that. Whoopi Goldberg and Oprah Winfrey, and a cast of others. I mean, cast of others. I think there's a young Lawrence Fishburne in there, if memory serves. Um,
Yeah.
and that movie to this day still resonates with me. Like, what a powerful message, what a powerful story that was. That is being remade. I don't know if you knew this, but they're remaking The
Yeah.
Color
Yeah. They
Purple.
remake everything. How can you do that? There's like some things like you don't remake Citizen Kane because it's like that's what it is. To me,
Yeah,
Citizen Kane, anything Orson Welles did, I wouldn't even try. Maybe a director wants to do that, but I was like, that was his vision. So I'm not really. I don't know why you would ever do that. And I think Color Purple stands as its own piece, but that's the world we live in, where people are so into cloning things. They're
yeah,
cloning like everything, and I'm like, why do that instead of why don't you go find like a really good piece of work and take that energy and make that the new Color Purple, but maybe it's not in the same vein, but something you could probably find a story that wasn't told that maybe you
yeah.
could tell. That story was already told, so you're just going to change maybe a couple of perspectives or something. But it's like, why? Like that's so frustrating to me as a fan of art to see how much energy is being put into these things like that.
And this is not to say that, I mean, I haven't seen this reinvention or this new version of The Color Purple. That's not to say that it's not going to be good, but I'm saying that it, that the first one just blew me away, and Steven Spielberg is just it's
Yeah,
hard to top that guy, right? He's such a
it's hard to
he's such
top
a
something
legend.
like that.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, people, you never know if the actor's going to have a different point of view. And I understand you remake things because it's a new time period,
yeah,
and so you do that. But I like original thought. I like original ideas. That's why I live in the underground. That's why this whole show was originally started to talk to emerging and independent artists and give them a chance. And what was that? So what's emerging means it usually is something that it is not a clone of something else. It might have been inspired by somebody
Yeah.
else, but it's not definitely not a clone of anything else. And I think a lot of times, the momentum of originality is like where's that? Like because we have so many things telling us that you got to do these steps, or you got to fit this, you got to have this, down to the, like we were told, like, oh, in music you got to do 160 BPM, and you got to have be in this key, and you got to do this. And I'm like, why? Did anybody tell Hendrix that? Did anybody tell, Stevie Wonder that, or tell John Lennon that when they went to do the White Album? They tell them they had to do it like that. No, they did what they wanted.
They
It's
sure
like
did.
why do you have to be so in, into the blueprint? And I think the blueprints is like, it's, you have a general blueprint, but sometimes it's good to have toss the blueprint out. you know, why?
Like, I appreciate what you're saying. Like, the arc of a story, there should definitely be, like, you don't want to leave your audience hanging. Otherwise, you'll just get panned. I mean, you can't have a cliffhanger that's so much of a cliffhanger that they have to wait 5 years for the sequel to come out,
Yeah, to
right?
the end. You got to
Yeah,
have some kind of structure. Yeah, you
yeah.
have to have
So,
some
I
structure.
mean, the, yeah, you want some similarity, and I don't know what, like the plot structure, beginning, middle, end. I don't know if there's a similarity to that in the music world. Like, give me
Yeah, we
something.
have the hook.
Like, what is?
Yeah, yeah, we have our intro, we have our, chorus, and then you have, like, the hook line and the outro and the alternate, like, fills. So a lot of times today, what you'll get is just a hook. Like, there
Oh,
are song structures, and to have an intro, to have a timing change, to have a key change. They're more complicated. It's older type of music. It would maybe be 3 to 5 minutes long. Now we have songs that are 2.3 minutes, and they're mostly hook. They really
wow.
don't have an outro. They don't have an intro. They don't have alternates. They don't have variations. They don't have typical song structure. And song structure is, a little tricky for people today, because, like, they're playing with drum machines. Well, if you're playing with a drum machine, it's easier to keep it in the same beat than to change the beats and put stops and breaks and changes. When you're playing with a live drummer, there tends to be an initial idea is like, well, yeah, I'm going to change the rhythm at this point. I'm going to change the structure. I'm actually going to stop and start and change the speed. That's kind of the nature of it. But a lot of times today we don't get that, and so it's kind of hook oriented. So people are looking for, like, the cliff note, like your whole story. Like, is somebody going to read your book, or are they just going to read the cliff note and just be happy with the cliff note and just kind of, okay, I got the whole point, and then I'm out? Because they're so immediate today. It's like, do they just want to get to the end and then get out, or do they want to stay with you to feel all those moments?
Yeah, and I guess that's I see what you're saying about the hook. It's like, yeah, so the craft of writing is, yeah, there's a hook in there, but you just can't have a hook. That you can't just base all of your storyline and make that hook be the presence throughout the entire story. I see what you're saying about that. Yeah. Hopefully,
Yeah, it's
hopefully
boring.
it's well written. Hopefully it's well written enough where they're hooked at the beginning, and then something else grabs them along with the way in the book, that they're like, okay, I got to keep reading this. I got to keep reading this. I can't put this down. It's such a good story. Hopefully, it just kind of perpetuates on itself like that. Likewise with music.
It's like a wave. Yeah, well, it's like the wave. If you got a wave, you got the crest, and you get the apex, and then you kind of get the point where you get the bottom of the waveform. Like, I deal with waveforms. I do design, square waves and sine waves, and you see it come up and come down, right? So you at the beginning, you get the high amplitude, and it waves off, it comes back down, right? So when it's most frenetic, that's where everybody's got the beat and they feel it. And then it drops off, and it might get a little. There might be silences, right? A lot of times in music, like, if you leave space between the notes, then the notes are more impactful. when you have space. But if you layer too much, it gets busy. So I think those concepts can be still applicable to writing. Like if you have too much going on, can people
Oh
discern
yeah.
what's going on? So if you try to leave a little bit, make it a little like not so you're not totally direct, like a Victorian poet coming up with the idea of little death. What does that mean? Well, they're not telling you the obvious thing. You have got to kind of interpret what does that mean, right? It's not obvious. So if you're not so obvious with the story, somebody might have to go back and look at it a couple of times to figure out what it is. But that's kind of why you want to draw somebody in. You don't
Yeah.
want to just hit them over the head.
Yeah. Like leave little teasers and nuggets along the way to like pull them along, to tug them along. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and that's the art, right? Because you don't want to do it so they get bored and they leave because it's not moving fast enough. But it's kind of balance. Like how much do you? It's like that's probably the sweet spot in writing. Like when you get to be a writer and you get into that zone that people get drawn in. Like so, your reader gets drawn in because they got in the zone, and you're the writer. You got in the zone because you created it, and then people appreciate the experience because you're creating this world. And I think that's similar with artists. Like we want people to feel like a sound painting. We want people when they listen to a song as a storyteller to get brought into that. And maybe that's their own interpretation of my work or any artist's work, but they'll see things. From hearing something, they see something. When you read something, you see it. You actually see that picture in your mind. And that's what you're trying to convey, right?
Absolutely. Hope um yeah, painting pictures in the mind with words, making the voice, the inner voice of the main character resonate within the head of whoever's reading the story. Yeah. So it becomes vibrant. It becomes an experience, hopefully, music or writing, it should be embraced as an experience.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be one dimensional. There should be some ebb and flow there, some give and take. I agree. Hopefully what we create
Do you
delivers
find,
and is appreciated. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, what do you find in this age of the real and the short and everybody's on their phone getting distracted by messages that as a writer you've got to draw somebody into something that they're gonna have to disconnect, right? They can't be on their TikTok in their Twitter responding to, like, they got to stop long enough to actually get into your work and get into that experience. And as a musician, we find that the attention span has been dropping. Like back in the 70s, we could have 6 minute, 7 minute, 10 minute, 12 minute songs. Now we're being told we can't go past like 2.3 minutes. The average customer doesn't want to listen to something longer than 2.3 minutes. And we're like, what? And if I'm a writer, like I don't start kicking in until probably 3 minutes. So it's like, what am I supposed to do about a world that only wants to listen for 2.3 and my stuff kicks in at like 3.5?
Yeah. And then you're stuck with that. This is my creativity. Let me go beyond my 2.5, or do you have to kind of feed to what the metrics are telling you? I will say, when I started education in 1990, we had one computer in the building. It was a Macintosh 2E that the yearbook editor, of course it was not network, the yearbook editor had. I know that because I was the yearbook editor and I had it in my room. But so there, in 1990, there was that piece of technology that just like, Apple busted on the scene in the 80s.
Yeah,
And then the and
I
then the
remember.
evolution of, oh my God, the internet, and then the dial-up, that right, that there was that wave. Then there was when we got T1, the internet connectivity was so much faster, and it was feeding our kids more information. And then we went one-to-one devices, and then everybody gets one of these for Christmas. It's reading. I will say, to your point, attention span, the lack of ability for students to have reading stamina, to like read a page and not just read it, but to digest the meaning of it, and then just to read
That's true. Yeah.
beyond a page, that stamina has really, really, really dropped off, and it's because of this. You know,
Hmm.
I'm guilty of it too. You know, I start getting a little twitchy about the 8 minute mark when I haven't checked my phone. I mean, it's just what society is now. Um, but I think because my brain development when I was so much younger and I loved reading and writing, that reading stamina piece had already been absorbed. It had
There.
already been
Yeah. You have it.
developed. Yeah. Um, so an
It was.
interesting point. And me being in the library and seeing it, like the evolution of technology, the de-evolution of reading appreciation. It's again,
Yeah. Reading comprehension. Sometimes I
yeah,
wonder because, like, I work in a world that's I'm a designer. I'm a software designer, but I have to write these specifications, and they're like research papers. And what I found in the last 10 years is when I give my work to a programmer, half the time the reading comprehension has dropped because I have something very clear saying step one, step two, step three, step four. You're right, real clear, but it might be like 60 pages worth of stuff. Right, it's very detailed, and I see people just missing entire sections, like they just
yeah,
totally missed it, and it starts making me wonder. It's like it seems like the reading comprehension has dropped, where people you can put it right in front of them and they miss it, and they're not reading through it. They're not really, like you said, they're not digesting what it meant. If I tell you some kind of algorithmic logic, you should actually probably sit there and kind of think through it and make sure you understand it. But if you just blow through it and read it, but you're not actually trying to apply it, so you don't learn it. You know, so if you're writing a story that's got some complexity to it and it deserves somebody to actually be giving you 90% of their attention, but they're only giving you 40%, then they're going to miss it.
yeah. Agreed. That was a great question. Thank you for asking that because yeah, it's a little heartbreaking, but I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up on the youth of today or the for the adults of tomorrow. I won't.
Well, I think people find out that it's cool to disconnect. I'm finding more people that say, yeah, I actually am disconnected and I'm going back and I'm reading The Grapes of Wrath. I'm going to read The Old Man and the Sea. I'm actually going to go read Moby Dick and see what people were talking about. Not because my teacher told me to read it, but I'm going to read it for my own understanding, or read Ernest Hemingway, or read some of the great stuff. And
Mhm.
once you start really getting into that, where you give yourself the space, and you say, well, it's cool to get lost in that world. When you get into that person's, that Hemingway world or the Moby Dick world, and he's like, wow, there's so much there. This is before TV, this is before
Oh yeah.
the thousands of channels, before the net. It's like I am actually getting drawn into this world. I think that's the great thing about reading, and I hope people will check out your work to get drawn into that too, because I think that's what's I talk to a lot of authors, and we're living in the information age, but check out every author we talk to. Like you should check out and read the book. You should go in, check it out, because it's an experience, and disconnect a little bit, so that you can actually appreciate what you're reading.
Disconnect. I hear it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. We have a room. We have a room that doesn't where you can't even hear the TV. Um, and that's basically our disconnect room. It's a great room. It's a great room where we have our books and no phones allowed in that room. No phones allowed in that room.
Well, Kimberly Van Sickle's Rights.com, and they've got the full link there that is fully clickable when we're published. So any platform that this is on, including Facebook and YouTube and all the other ones that will be on, like Apple and Spotify, you'll be able to click through on that and get to that website. If they get to that website, is that how they can get to the book?
Absolutely. Yep. The audiobook is coming out in
Great.
January. So we have paperback, hardback, ebook, and the audiobook will be published in January. So stay tuned, folks.
Well, that's awesome. Audiobook is a good way for those people who commute to get them into reading in a different way.
Absolutely.
And that's a good way. I was a commuter for I was a, what do you call it, one of those you know, guys who was just on the road all the time, road warrior. And listening to books on the plane and in the Uber was always
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. Yeah,
So thank you. That's a cool thing to look forward to, because that gives people another option.
absolutely.
But thank you again
So
for being on the show. I appreciate it. I hope everybody checks this out.
it was my honor. Thank you so much.
Good.
This was such a great experience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again. Have a great night.
Likewise. Bye, y'all.
Bye.